Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're stepping into a Russian village on the edge of famine, a place where black soil once promised life, but where hunger now settles heavier than the snow. Before we start this harrowing journey, do me one small favour. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you'd prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you want the ultimate immersive experience, consider using a pair of wireless earbuds. They're comfortable, discreet, and designed so you can wear them even while sleeping. I've linked my favourite pair plus other sleep tools in the description. Now, lie back, get comfortable, let's begin. You stand on soil that should be enough to sustain you. It stretches dark and rich beneath your feet. A black earth that crumbles easily in the hand, heavy with moisture and nutrients. The horizon lies wide and forgiving, a great sweep of farmland broken only by stands of trees, or the glimmer of a river. In spring, when the frost finally loosens its grip and the ground softens, neighbours move out in groups, their ploughs cutting furrows in long, even lines. Wooden harnesses creak, horses snort, and the smell of freshly turned soil drifts in the breeze. There is a rhythm to it: step, pull, cut, step again. And though the work is backbreaking, it carries a kind of reassurance. The earth receives the seed, and the seed promises to return as bread. That is the bargain of the land, and it has been honoured for as long as anyone remembers. Families treat these days with a kind of festival mood. Men bend to the work of the plough, sweat already forming beneath caps, while women scatter seed from rough sacks, the small grains catching the light before they fall into dark soil. Children skip at the edges of the fields, laughing, chasing one another through the grass, occasionally bending to pick up stray kernels that have spilled. The older ones help drive the animals, calling to them in sharp voices, imitating their fathers. You hear neighbours sing to keep time, low folk songs that rise and fall across the fields, each voice weaving into the others. The air smells of damp earth and wood smoke drifting from distant cottages, and the sound of the songs lingers in the cool air. For a moment, you believe it is enough simply to live here, to trust the ground beneath you, to know that food will come as surely as the seasons turn. Your own hands ache from the work, the skin raw where the rope digs in, but you cling to the thought that every seed you scatter is an answer to winter's hunger. You imagine the green shoots rising straight and tall, rippling across the fields until they meet the sky. The barn will fill, you tell yourself. The pantry will hold enough to last through snow and cold, with loaves stacked neatly on the table and sacks of grain stored against the wall. You see your children eating without hesitation, tearing bread in rough chunks, not asking if there is more. You picture neighbours visiting, trading laughter as easily as they trade milk, eggs or grain. Each image steadies you, each picture a reminder of what all this labour is meant to secure. The land itself seems to join in your faith. The soil here is famous, known across the empire as fertile beyond measure, a gift of rivers and floods that have layered it deep with life. Even as sweat blinds your eyes, you think of how many have survived here, how many winters passed while this same ground gave and gave again. You convince yourself that whatever difficulties lie ahead, they cannot overwhelm such generosity. The earth does not betray, not when fed and cared for. If you labour hard enough, if you plant deeply enough, then surely the harvest will follow. You tell yourself that misfortune may strike elsewhere, in distant provinces or in lands beyond Russia's borders, but here in the very heart of plenty, hunger cannot touch you. Evenings bring a softer rhythm. When the day's ploughing is finished, families gather near cottages where smoke curls from chimneys and the smell of porridge or stewed cabbage drifts into the cooling air. People sit on wooden stools or the bare ground, tired bodies leaning against one another, voices falling into easy chatter. Songs are sung more gently now, without the hard edge of labour, and laughter drifts across the open yards. Your wife stirs a pot by the fire, her hands moving with practiced ease, stretching what little remains from the winter into a meal that tastes almost like plenty. She smiles at the children as she hands out bowls, saving her portion for last. You feel the ache in your shoulders, but it is an honest pain, a reminder of the work already done, the rows already planted. Fires flicker against faces hollowed by effort, but bright with a simple faith. Food will come, as it always has. You watch children nodding to sleep against their mothers, bellies full for now, and you think the worst days of the year are already behind you. The world itself seems to conspire in your hope. Spring evenings glow with long light, the sky pale blue streaked with pink, the air cool enough to soothe, but not cold enough to threaten. The soil glistens with dew at dawn, a sheen that makes every field look like a promise newly signed. When you walk the rows the next morning, you notice how even the smallest seeds lie secure in their furrows, hidden beneath a protective layer of earth. You cannot see them, not yet, but you trust they're waiting, ready to push through the ground at the right time. The smell of soil clings to your clothes, the taste of dust at the back of your throat, both reminders that you're bound to this place, tied to its rhythms. Even the silence between neighbours carries a kind of peace, the unspoken understanding that everyone here shares the same labour and the same reward. You think often of winter, but only in the way one thinks of an enemy already defeated. Snow lies behind you, hunger with it. The long nights, the bitter cold, the scraping of cupboards for crumbs, all of it belongs to a season that has passed. Ahead lies the promise of sun and growth, the rising hum of bees, the fields rippling in a warm wind. You imagine bread rising in the oven, golden crusts cracking, steam filling the room when they're broken open. You picture milk poured fresh, butter spread thick, children eating until they push the plate away with satisfied groans. You believe, with all the force of exhaustion and longing, that this is what the earth has prepared for you. The memory of hunger sharpens the vision of plenty, and you cling to it. When you rise at dawn and look across the land, you feel almost rich. The horizon is wide, the soil stretches in every direction, and though your hands are cracked and your back bent, you know you are part of something immense. The fields are not only yours, but belong to all who labour here, every furrow carrying the weight of survival. To live in such a place, you tell yourself, is fortune enough. Neighbours call to one another, voices clear in the morning air, and you raise your hand in reply, the gesture as natural as breathing. In the chorus of labour, there is no room for fear. The sound of a plough biting into soil drowns out doubt. The rhythm of seeds scattering silences worry. Even as fatigue sets into your bones, you steady yourself with the thought that this ground has never failed. You may fear storms or pests or illness, but not the soil itself. It is too rich, too generous, too eternal to betray you. Your grandparents lived on it, your parents trusted it, and now you follow the same path, planting in hope and faith. Hunger is a shadow from another place, another time, never here, never now. You tell yourself that no matter what happens elsewhere in Russia, wars, shortages, political decrees, your earth will remain steady beneath you. It is the one certainty you have, and the one you cannot live without. The days pass in a steady rhythm of work and rest, the fields filling with furrows, the sacks of seed growing lighter, the soil closing over your efforts like a blanket. When you finally lean on your hoe and look across the rows, the land seems to breathe with you, vast and dark, a waiting mouth ready to feed you. You imagine the grain already rising, golden in the sun, tall enough to brush your waist. The barn door stands open in your mind and you see the floor piled high. The scent of grain filling the air, mice scurrying across but unable to dent the abundance. You can hear your children laughing. their voices untroubled by hunger. You can almost taste the bread already baked, soft on the tongue, the crust flaking beneath your teeth. As twilight falls once more, the songs rise again across the fields, tired voices carrying notes of hope and relief. You sit for a moment in the cooling air, watching the horizon fade into shadow, and you let yourself believe it is enough. The ground beneath you is heavy with promise. Whatever storms may come, whatever demands may be made, you tell yourself that this earth will provide. You look at the furrows stretching wide and deep, and you convince yourself that hunger will not touch you this year. The weeks after planting are filled with a patient kind of waiting, the long silence between the sowing of seed and the first green shoots. At first, the land seems to answer your hope. Pale stalks pierce the soil in neat rows, trembling slightly in the wind. Fragile but alive, you walk the furrows with cautious pride, tracing the lines with your eyes as if they're guarantees of survival. Yet as spring yields to summer, the warmth becomes relentless. Heat presses down and on the fields, not the gentle sun that ripens grain, but a punishing fire that cracks the soil and leaves the air heavy with dust. You lift clumps of earth in your hand and find them dry, breaking apart into powder instead of holding the damp richness you rely upon. Rain comes, but not in the right way, not in the steady rhythms that soak the ground and feed the roots. It falls in bursts, too much at once, then nothing for weeks, flattening tender shoots with sudden downpours, then abandoning them to wither beneath the burning sky. You walk the fields each day, watching the plants struggle, some bending low, some curling at the edges, others simply stopping in their growth. The promise of spring has begun to falter, and with each passing week the rows look thinner. Where you expected a full rippling carpet of green, gaps open, leaving bare soil exposed. In some places weeds thrive where wheat does not. Mocking you with their resilience, you kneel to pull them out, your hands dusty, nails packed with soil, but you know the problem is deeper than weeds. It lies in the stubborn skies above, in the storms that strike at the wrong time, in the drought that creeps between rains, in the sun that no longer nourishes but scorches. A heaviness settles in your chest, though you say nothing to your children. They ask when the harvest will be ready, and you tell them soon, but even as the words leave your mouth, you feel their hollowness. In the evenings, families gather in their cottages, voices low. The laughter that once carried across fields is gone, replaced by murmurs of doubt. Men lean close to one another, muttering about the stalks that will not stand tall, about the ears of grain that should be swelling but remain thin. Women stir pots more slowly, stretching what is left of last year's stores, their faces tight with calculation. Everyone remembers a bad year or two, times when crops disappointed, when bread grew smaller. But this feels different. There is a brittle quality to the fields, as if the land itself is withdrawing. You try to reassure yourself that there is still time, that the rains may yet come as they should, that a sudden change might save the harvest. But the silence that follows these reassurances makes clear that no one believes them fully, not even you. Despite the failing crops, the officials arrive, as they always do. They ride into villages with their ledgers and stamps, boots polished, uniforms pressed, as though the misery in the fields has nothing to do with them. They do not look at the shriveled stalks or the parched soil. Instead, they demand figures, counting sacks of grain, recording quotas, insisting on numbers that no longer match the reality of the earth. Their eyes linger on barns, measuring space rather than abundance, assuming the fullness that once seemed inevitable. Families gather anxiously as they take their share, watching the piles diminish, each scoop of grain a piece of the future carried away. The officials smile faintly, or worse, remain expressionless, their voices flat as they declare obligations met, even when everyone standing there knows the fields have failed. You feel a knot in your stomach as the barn empties. The smell of grain that once reassured you now carries the scent of loss. Each sack lifted a reminder that the harvest you counted on has already been halved. Neighbours glance at one another but say nothing because protest is useless. The state demands its share, whether the land yields or not. Quotas do not shrink because the stalks are thin. The barns must be emptied even when the cupboards already feel hollow. It is an absurdity that gnaws at you, the gap between what is taken and what remains. But to speak openly would invite danger, not relief. So you watch in silence, clenching your hands, tasting bitterness on your tongue as the wagons roll away. Around you the village changes. Children who once played in the dirt lanes now linger near doorways, their games quieter, their voices less certain. Women measure flour more carefully, stretching dough thinner, making loaves that do not quite satisfy. Men return from the fields with a heaviness in their gait, shoulders slumping, eyes darting toward barns and storage bins, as if counting what remains could change the total. The songs that once lifted during planting are absent, replaced by uneasy silences. You hear whispers at night through thin cottage walls, neighbours confiding to one another their fear of what the months ahead may bring. Rumours of shortages in nearby villages drift through like smoke, clinging to every conversation. The tension does not come only from the land, but from the awareness of being watched. Officials may have departed with their quotas, but their presence lingers, an invisible weight pressing down on the community. You never know who will return, or when, or whether more will be demanded. People lower their voices, their words guarded, as though the air itself might carry a report back to the authorities. Even as the fields fail, the requirement to appear compliant grows stronger. You must smile, nod, agree that the quotas are just, that the officials have done their work fairly. To do otherwise would be reckless, and recklessness can be punished as harshly as disobedience. At night your wife lowers her voice, glancing toward the window as though someone might be listening, her words clipped and cautious. She asks if the fields will recover, though her eyes already hold the answer. You cling to hope as long as you can. Perhaps the weather will shift. Perhaps the grain that survives will grow fuller in the final weeks. Perhaps nature will provide some mercy. But each day the evidence gathers against you. The heads of wheat that should be plump remain small, their husks brittle between your fingers. The fields that should be heavy with ripening grain whisper instead with emptiness when the wind passes. You begin to count not what you will have, but what you will lack. Meals are measured against the sacks still left in storage, against the scraps hidden away. The conversations around you turn from when the harvest will be ready to whether there will be a harvest at all. The dissonance grows unbearable. On one side, you see the stalks bending low, starved of water, scorched by sun, offering too little for too many mouths. On the other side, you see the officials with their records, confident in numbers that deny what your eyes already know. Between the two lies, your fear, swelling day by day. To look at the fields is to face the truth of hunger. To look at the barns is to watch that truth enforced. Your neighbours understand it too. They avoid your gaze in public, but in private their whispers admit the same dread, that the earth will not yield, and that what little it gives will not be yours to keep. Each evening you return from the fields, with dirt under your nails and dust clinging to your clothes, the taste of dryness in your mouth. You try to find comfort in small things, the flicker of firelight, the sound of your children's breathing as they fall asleep, the sight of the moon rising steady over the land. But beneath it all lies the gnawing certainty that this year will not be like the others. The ground feels strained, the air too thin, the barns too bare. You cannot banish the image of the wagons rolling away with their loads, the officials counting each sack, the future growing smaller with every departure. Autumn comes, but it does not bring the reassurance you once expected. Where the harvest should be a time of relief, of barns filled and fields gathered, it feels instead like a hollow ritual. The grain you take from the earth is thinner than it should be, the heads brittle, the kernels small. You bend low in the fields, trying to gather every stalk, but the piles are meagre. Neighbours speak in clipped tones as they work, no longer singing, no longer laughing at children darting between the rows. Still, officials arrive to measure and collect, declaring quotas met, even as you and your neighbours look at one another in disbelief. To them, the numbers are satisfied. To you, the cupboards are already beginning to echo. The rituals of harvest continue as though nothing has changed. Men bend their backs to gather what little grain there is. Women tie bundles with hands raw from rope and cold. Children run errands between households. Yet the mood is subdued, stripped of celebration. The barns do not groan with abundance, but instead swallow what little is poured into them. Sacks stand loose and half-filled, leaning against one another like tired bodies. When you step inside, the smell of grain is faint, not the heavy, rich scent of years past. Still, when the officials inspect, they nod and record, satisfied that their quotas are fulfilled. You cannot understand their confidence, not when you see the hollow spaces, not when you hear the scratching echo of a broom across a floor too empty. At first, the change in food is subtle, easy to ignore if you do not think too carefully. Bread loaves grow smaller, baked with more air, cut thinner on the table. Meals stretch longer with soups that are more water than substance, flavoured faintly by scraps of cabbage or potato. Mothers speak cheerfully to their children, urging them to eat quickly, hiding their own hesitation as they pass their portion away. Fathers chew slowly, as though savouring, disguising the truth that there is less to savour each day. You tell yourself this is temporary, that next season will be better, that this year is simply a lean one. Yet in your chest you feel a tightness, a sense that what is shrinking will not expand again. The markets mirror the change, growing emptier with each passing week. Stalls that once carried bread, butter, milk, and meat now stand bare or do not open at all. The few vendors who arrive have little to sell and less enthusiasm to sell it. Coins clink faintly in purses, yet they buy almost nothing. Women walk from stall to stall, baskets dangling light from their arms. Returning home with nothing more than a few scraps or the thin promise of a trade, the air, once thick with the smell of baking or roasting, now carries only dust and smoke. Silence fills the square where merchants once shouted prices, and the quiet is more frightening than any noise. Inside homes, the adjustments become visible. Bread that once sat in a round loaf on the table now shrinks to thin slices, then to crusts. Children who once complained of being full now ask quietly for more, their voices subdued as though they know the answer before it is given. Mothers sit longer at the table watching their children eat, their own plates barely touched. They rise quickly afterward, busying themselves with chores to disguise the absence of food, though their eyes linger on the crumbs left behind. You notice the hollows beginning to appear in cheeks, the shadows beneath eyes, the way belts are tightened another notch without comment. Evenings feel heavier. Where families once shared stories or songs after supper, now they disperse quickly, conserving energy, stretching silence over the empty space where laughter once lived. Fires burn low to save fuel, casting long shadows against walls. The crackle of flames is interrupted only by the sound of spoons scraping at bowls, as though the sound itself could summon more food. The smell of smoke lingers in clothes and hair, mingling with the faint sourness of empty pots. You feel hunger more sharply at night, when work no longer distracts you, when your stomach's ache presses hardest. It becomes a companion, lying beside you in bed, gnawing and insistent. As the shortages grow more visible, so too does the unease. Neighbours speak in lowered voices when they gather, casting glances toward barns and cupboards as though the scarcity is a secret that must be guarded. Some claim to have hidden small stores of grain, though you cannot tell if this is truth or bluff meant to discourage envy. Others begin to barter quietly, exchanging scraps of food for tools or clothing, though such trades rarely satisfy either side. Trust begins to fray, thin as the bread itself, and the closeness of the community loosens. Where once you shared in the joy of planting, you now share in silence, each family retreating into its own fear. You try to reassure your children that this is temporary. You tell them that hunger is part of the cycle, that lean years are always followed by better ones. But your words ring hollow, even to your own ears. The cycle depends on the land returning its promise, and this year it has not. You find yourself glancing at your children's bowls, calculating how much less they can bear, how much you can surrender without breaking. Their eyes meet yours, too young to understand fully, but not too young to sense the unease. They chew slowly, lips dry, swallowing hard, as if the act itself demands effort. The shortages make their mark not just on stomachs, but on the senses. The air inside the cottage grows stale, heavy with smoke from stoves lit more for warmth than for cooking. The taste of food dulls, reduced to breads stretched with flour of uncertain origin, soups flavoured with water rather than meat. Your hands feel clumsy, trembling faintly as you work, the weakness already creeping in. The touch of straw on the floor at night no longer feels like rest, but like a thin barrier between you and the hunger pressing from below. Even sound changes. Instead of laughter, you hear the hollow clatter of empty pots, the rustle of sacks that hold almost nothing, the quiet sighs of mothers who think no one is listening. Markets soon become a ritual of disappointment. You rise early, walk into the square, and stand among others, waiting for merchants who no longer arrive. The silence grows tense, filled with shifting feet and wary eyes. When a cart does appear, people crowd quickly, hands reaching for what little is offered. The few loaves vanish in moments, snapped up before you can reach the front. You walk home empty-handed, carrying only the weight of absence. The path back feels longer each time, the cottage smaller, the cupboard emptier. Still, you cling to fragments of routine. Bread is baked, though smaller, thinner, harder. The smell fills the air for a moment, stirring a memory of abundance, before the crusts are divided, disappearing into small mouths. You gather around the table, speak of the day's work, force smiles, yet beneath the gestures lies the truth. The bread does not last, the bins grow hollow, the cupboard echoes when you open it. You count the days ahead not in weeks or months, but in meals, calculating how many more you can manage before the nothingness becomes complete. As the evenings grow colder and the light shorter, the cupboards shrink toward emptiness. You know that winter has not yet arrived, yet already you feel the weight of it pressing against you. Hunger has begun to shape your days, and the shadow of it lengthens across the village. You find yourself standing in the barn, staring at the sagging sacks, listening to the faint rustle of mice scurrying within. You reach down to touch the grain, to feel its weight in your palm, but there is less each time, less than you can admit aloud. You close your hand around it, unwilling to let go, though you know it must vanish soon. Winter closes in, and the last of the bread is gone. What once sat in round loaves on the table has dwindled into crusts, then into crumbs, and now into memory. You open the cupboard to find bare shelves, the faint smell of stale flour clinging to empty bins, the jars of sour cabbage scraped clean. Even the mice that once scattered at your step have abandoned the place, as if they too know there is nothing left. Outside, snow drifts against the cottage walls, sealing you inside a world where the stove burns low and the air tastes of ash. The land that promised life now gives you nothing, and you begin the work of finding substitutes. You start with weeds, pulling them from beneath the thin snow or from the corners of barns where roots still cling. Nettles, thistles, dandelion greens, all of them boiled into water until they collapse into a bitter sludge. The smell fills the room with something sharp and metallic, a scent closer to medicine than food. You lift the spoon to your lips and taste bitterness that scrapes at your tongue, but you force yourself to swallow, convincing yourself that it is nourishment. The children grimace and cry at first, but hunger is a cruel teacher, and soon they eat in silence, eyes wet, mouths set hard. You ladle out more, knowing it will never be enough, but it is all you can give. When weeds no longer suffice, you turn to bark. Strips peeled from trees with knives dulled by cold hands, their rough skins scraped and boiled until they soften. Your wife bends over the pot, stirring slowly, the steam rising into her face, carrying the bitter smell of nettles and bark. She tastes it first, swallowing hard before handing the bowl to the children, as though testing poison. The broth is dark and woody, the smell like wet earth and resin. You chew carefully, your teeth grinding against fibrous strands that cling stubbornly between them. The taste is not entirely unpleasant at first, familiar, like walking through a forest after rain, but it soon grows sour, a reminder that you're not meant to eat what you now swallow. The children gag, spitting into their bowls, but you hush them, urging them to try again. You remind them there is nothing else, that this is what survival requires. Their small jaws move reluctantly, their faces pinched, and you know you have forced them into something unnatural. Straw becomes another trick, cut into lengths, chewed until your mouth is full of dust and splinters. You do not pretend it is food, only that it fills the mouth, the act of chewing deceiving the body for a moment. The sensation is sharp, scratching the inside of your cheeks, leaving your tongue dry and gritty. You spit most of it out, but for a few moments you're less aware of the gnawing emptiness inside. Sometimes you mix it with water, swallowing the foul liquid, convincing yourself it is better than nothing. The body is not fooled for long, but the gesture of eating brings a fragile sense of relief. Leather follows, old belts, scraps of harness, boots too worn to wear. You cut them into strips, soak them in water, boil them until the water turns cloudy and the air fills with a smell like boiled glue. The pieces soften slightly, enough to chew, though the taste is acrid, the texture stubborn. You gnaw and swallow, feeling the leather catch in your throat, pressing it down with gulps of water. Your stomach accepts it reluctantly, cramping afterward as though protesting the insult. But hunger leaves you no choice. What once was meant to bind or carry now becomes a meal. The absurdity does not escape you, but you chew anyway, jaw aching, determined to feed yourself even with what was never meant to be food. The earth itself seems to conspire in these substitutions. You scrape soil from roots, washing it into pots, convincing yourself it adds thickness to watery broths. The taste is metallic, like rust or clay, and it grits between your teeth. Yet you find yourself growing accustomed to it, the flavour sinking into your tongue until it no longer surprises you. Mould grows on scraps left too long in corners, and you scrape it away at first, but eventually you eat it too, telling yourself it is just another bitterness, no worse than the weeds or bark. The line between what can be eaten and what should never be eaten fades until it hardly exists. The cottage begins to smell of desperation. Smoke from the stove mingles with the sour scent of boiling weeds, the sharpness of bark, the damp odour of leather soaked too long. Steam clings to the walls, carrying with it the essence of failure. When you step outside, the air is crisp and sharp with frost, but when you return inside, it presses down on you, a reminder of the strange meals you have forced upon yourself. Your clothes carry it, your hair absorbs it, your skin smells faintly of rotten resin. Even sleep does not escape it. You lie down and inhale the sourness of your own breath, flavoured by the earth itself. Your body reacts slowly, but inevitably. Stomachs cramp, bowels loosen, fevers rise. You feel weaker after eating than before, your limbs heavy, your head light. Children complain of aching bellies, clutching themselves in corners, faces pale and lips cracked. You tell them the food will help, though you know it does not. You chew bark and leather yourself, forcing it down to prove it can be done, but each swallow leaves you emptier. The act of eating has lost its comfort, becoming instead another form of labour, a cruel task with no reward. The memory of real food becomes sharper as it fades. Bread soft and fragrant, milk cool and rich, meat tender and filling. Those memories torment you as you gnaw on what no one should ever call food. Markets no longer exist in any recognisable form. A few desperate figures gather with bundles of weeds, scraps of bone, or jars of cloudy water flavoured faintly with cabbage. Trades are attempted, though no one truly profits. A neighbour offers bark boiled in a weak broth in exchange for a handful of straw. Another shows a strip of leather, gnawed at one end, as though it could be shared. The scene feels more like a parody of life than life itself, a grim theatre where everyone knows the play is meaningless, but performs it anyway. You watch, participate, and walk away with nothing but shame. In the evenings, when the wind howls outside and the snow piles higher, you sit by the stove and stir a pot of bitter liquid. The children huddle close, eyes wide, their breaths shallow. The broth tastes of soil and resin, leaves your tongue coated, your stomach unsettled. Yet you lift the spoon again, forcing it into your mouth, swallowing against your body's protest. Hunger demands obedience, and you obey. The room is quiet except for the scrape of spoons and the faint crackle of fire. The silence feels heavier than words, heavier than the snow pressing against the cottage walls. You begin to forget what satisfaction feels like. Eating no longer brings comfort, only the removal of pain for a brief moment. Each swallow is a negotiation, your body resisting, your will forcing it through. You no longer dream of abundance but of neutrality, of silence in the stomach, of one night without the gnawing ache. You tell yourself it is enough, but even as you say it, the hunger returns, curling inside you, unyielding. What was once a gnawing becomes constant. At first, hunger arrived in intervals, a sharp ache before meals, a dull edge after. Now it never leaves. It sits with you at the table, follows you to the fields, curls against you at night. Your stomach contracts and twists until it feels like a hollow knot, a space so deep it might swallow the rest of you whole. Each swallow of bark, broth, or nettle soup eases the pain for a moment, but soon the emptiness returns, sharper, more insistent. It is no longer a visitor to be endured. It has made its home in your body. The children feel it most visibly. At night they cry, their thin voices cracking into the silence of the cottage, the sound so brittle it seems it might shatter. They beg for bread in their sleep, reaching with small hands for loaves that no longer exist. Sometimes they wake sobbing, clutching their bellies, their cheeks damp with tears. You and your wife take turns holding them, rocking them as though they were infants again, whispering promises you do not believe. Their cries fill the night until exhaustion finally silences them, and when they sleep, their faces twitch with restless dreams, lips moving as though chewing in their sleep. During the day, the weakness spreads. Children who once ran through the lanes now stumble after a few steps, collapsing onto the straw with a sigh. They sit quietly, their energy spent, eyes glazed as though watching something far away. You try to urge them to chores to fetch water or gather wood. but they shake their heads and sink back against the wall. Their laughter has disappeared, replaced by a silence so unnatural it frightens you more than their cries. You and your wife exchange glances over their bent heads, each of you unwilling to say what both already know, that the hunger is hollowing them out faster than it does you. Adults fare little better. In the fields, neighbours collapse mid-task, their bodies unable to sustain the labour. Men stagger as they try to push ploughs through hardened soil, sweat streaking their faces, hands trembling. Women bend to lift bundles of sticks and fall to their knees, their breath shallow, their lips pale. Those who remain standing work slowly, each movement deliberate, as though they are wading through water. The once rhythmic songs of labour have vanished, replaced by the occasional grunt of effort, the scrape of tools, the thud of bodies giving way. You feel your own legs weaken beneath you, your vision swimming when you bend, black spots clouding your eyes. The headaches are relentless. They begin as a pressure behind the temples, then spread until your entire skull feels caught in a vice. Light burns your eyes and sound rattles in your head. Sometimes the pain pulses in rhythm with your heartbeat, sharp enough to make you wince, though you try not to let the children see. Your wife presses her fingers to her own forehead in silence, her lips pressed tight, but you can see the lines deepening across her brow. She moves more slowly around the cottage now, her steps heavy, her shoulders stooped. You both tell yourselves it is only fatigue, but fatigue does not make the world spin when you stand too quickly, does not cause you to reach out for walls to steady yourself. The body grows strange under constant deprivation. Your clothes sag against your frame, your belt tightened to its last hole, your ribs sharp beneath your skin. Your hands tremble, even when they're still. Sometimes when you lift the spoon to your mouth, it shakes so badly you spill half the contents before you can swallow. The children's cheeks have hollowed, their eyes too large for their faces, their bones protruding in angles where once there was softness. Your wife ties a scarf tighter around her head, as if fabric can disguise the thinning of her hair, the greyness spreading across her skin. You catch her gazing at her reflection in a pot of water, then turning away quickly, ashamed of the face that looks back. Vision itself begins to blur. At first you blink it away, thinking it is only tiredness. But the haze lingers, the outlines of things soften, edges disappear, and the world takes on a watery shimmer. You squint to focus, but the strain brings only more pain. Sometimes the blur clears for a moment, but never fully, never for long. The world feels less solid than it once did, as though hunger is erasing even your ability to see clearly. When you stumble in the doorway or knock over a bucket, you tell the children it is only clumsiness, but inside you feel a mounting panic. Even your senses, once sharp, are slipping. In the cottage, the sound of hunger is constant. Bellies rumble loudly, echoing in the silence. The noise is relentless as the pain itself. Children moan softly in their sleep, their voices frayed to whispers. Your wife stifles her coughs, muffling them in her sleeve, but you hear them anyway, low and rasping, a reminder that her body too is failing. The fire crackles weakly, too little fuel to burn strongly, and its thin warmth does little to comfort. The smell of smoke mixes with the sour odour of sweat, of unwashed clothes, of bodies weakening together in too close a space. Even breathing feels heavy, as though the air itself has grown dense with want. You try to work through the exhaustion, to move as though your body were not betraying you. You fetch water from the well, though the bucket feels heavier each day. The rope carving into your palms. You split wood, though the axe wobbles in your hands, the swing too weak to drive it cleanly. You carry what little you can back to the cottage, your chest heaving, your legs trembling. Your wife does the same, her breath ragged as she bends over the pot, stirring weeds into water. Neither of you speaks of it, but you see the truth in each other's faces. Hunger is not an obstacle to be passed. It is a presence that has settled into every corner of your life. The village reflects your own struggle. Doors creak open more rarely now. Lanes lie empty. Smoke drifts faintly from fewer chimneys. Neighbours greet one another with nods, but little else. Voices too weak, words too costly. Children no longer play outside. Even the animals grow thin, their ribs visible, their eyes dulled. The silence grows oppressive, broken only by the occasional crash of someone falling in the fields, the cry of a child, the barking of dogs scavenging for scraps. You begin to measure time, not in days or weeks, but in meals, each one thinner than the last, each one a reminder of what is missing. At night, when you lie awake listening to the shallow breaths of your family, the hunger presses hardest. The straw beneath you feels rougher, your body more fragile against it. You shift from side to side, trying to ease the ache in your stomach, but it is always there, pulsing, gnawing, alive. You reach out in the dark and feel your wife's hand, the bones sharp beneath her skin, and you hold it loosely, as though any pressure might break it. She squeezes once faintly, then lets go, turning away. Each day confirms what you already know. This is not temporary, not a season to be endured until better times. The hunger has taken root, burrowed into your body, threaded itself into your thoughts. As bodies weaken, sickness comes. Hunger was cruel enough when it gnawed alone, but now it brings companions, slipping into huts and cottages with the cold wind. The emptiness inside you has thinned your blood, dulled your strength, stripped the defences your body once relied upon. A simple cough no longer passes quickly. It lingers, rattling in the chest until it shakes the entire body. Scrapes that once healed in days turn red, fester, and spread. Children's noses bleed without reason, their lips cracking until every smile splits into pain. The air inside the cottages grows damp and sour, thick with the smell of sweat and smoke, and illness spreads in that closeness, moving from one family to the next without effort. It begins with stomachs, already weakened by bark broth and mouldy bread. Dysentery runs through the huts, a merciless sickness that drains what little strength remains. Children clutch themselves and cry out, their voices hoarse, their bellies cramping as water pours from them faster than it can be replaced. The stench fills the air, clinging to the straw mats, and rags meant to contain it, saturating the room with rot. You and your wife take turns washing soiled cloths in icy water, your hands numb as you wring them out, your faces turned away from the steam that carries the sour smell. No matter how much you clean, the odour lingers, pressing into your clothes, your hair, your skin. You begin to smell of sickness yourself, even when your own body has not yet succumbed. Bellies swell grotesquely with starvation. Children look pregnant with emptiness, their skin stretched tight over protruding bones, their legs thin and stick-like beneath the swollen mound of their stomachs. They shift restlessly, unable to find comfort, their ribs poking through their shirts, their spines sharp against the straw. Adults fare no better. Some bloat, others shrink, their bodies reacting in strange, unpredictable ways. Neighbours whisper of curses, of God's anger, but you know it is only hunger wearing different masks. When you look at your own body, you no longer recognise it. Your arms seem too thin, your chest sunken, your belly distended in ways that feel alien. You touch yourself and feel as though you are pressing against another person, a stranger living inside your own skin. Coughs echo through the village. Thin and reedy at first, they deepen into rattles that shake the walls. Each cough sounds like the tearing of cloth, harsh and dry, then wet and gurgling as lungs fill with phlegm. Children cough until they vomit, their small bodies heaving, faces flushed with fever. Your wife coughs too, at night when she thinks you're asleep. pressing her face into the blanket to muffle it. But you hear her anyway. Hear the rasp that deepens each day, the pauses where her breath should be. You pretend not to notice in the morning, though her eyes are ringed with shadows, her lips tinged faintly blue. Neighbours stop speaking of work or harvests and begin to speak only of coughs, whose child has one, whose wife has grown weaker, who lies in bed and cannot rise. Fever follows, burning hot in bodies already wasted. Children shiver beneath blankets, then kick them away as heat overwhelms them. Their foreheads gleam with sweat. Their eyes roll back. Their lips mutter nonsense. Adults sink into corners, unable to rise, their faces slick with moisture, their skin clammy and cold beneath the heat. You sit beside them, fanning with rags dipped in water, but nothing changes. The fever comes and goes as it pleases, unbothered by your efforts, laughing at the notion of care. You feel it rise in yourself, a flush that spreads across your cheeks, a sweat that soaks your shirt, and you wonder how long you can resist. Skin slips loosely over bones, as though your body no longer remembers its own shape. Your wife's hands, once strong from kneading dough and carrying water, now hang slack, the bones sharp against your touch. When she stirs the pot, her sleeve slides back to reveal an arm that looks skeletal, the skin sagging where muscle has wasted away. The children's faces have narrowed, their eyes too large, their skin pale and stretched. When you look at neighbours, you see skulls emerging through skin, their cheeks hollow, their necks cords of tendon. You catch sight of your own reflection in a pool of water and startle at the stranger staring back, hollow-eyed and gaunt. The sickness has not only weakened you, it has remade you. The air in the huts is heavy with illness. It smells of sour sweat, of soiled straw, of breath gone foul from dehydration and fever. The stoves burn low, not strong enough to drive out the damp, and mould creeps along the walls, feeding on the moisture. When you step outside, the air is sharp with frost, clean compared to the suffocating closeness inside. But you cannot stay away long. The children's cries call you back, thin voices echoing in the gloom, demanding your presence even when you have nothing to give. You sit beside them, stroking their hair, feeling the heat beneath your hand, wishing your touch could soothe more than it does. Neighbours grow quiet, their cottages shuttered, their doors closed against the wind and the eyes of others. Rumours spread of entire families too ill to rise from their mats, lying together in silence, waiting. You pass one hut and see the door ajar, a thin wisp of smoke rising from the chimney, but no sound within. You know better than to enter. Some illnesses can be shared with a glance, with a breath, with a careless step across the threshold. You walk past quickly, though your stomach twists with guilt. Inside your own home, the illnesses multiply. One child's cough infects the next. One fever spreads through the room. You hear your wife muttering prayers beneath her breath as she wrings out rags, dipping them in cold water, laying them across foreheads. Her hands shake, not just from weakness, but from despair. She does not speak it aloud, but you see the truth in her downcast eyes. Each act of care feels more like delaying the inevitable than fighting it. Still she persists, because to stop would be to surrender entirely, and none of you can yet admit defeat. The days blur together in a haze of illness. Morning arrives with coughing, afternoon with cries, evening with groans of discomfort. Night is the worst when the darkness magnifies every sound, when the fire burns low and shadows dance across faces damp with fever. You do not sleep, or if you do, you dream of sickness, of swollen bellies and rattling breaths. You wake with the same heaviness, the same stench, the same reality pressing down upon you. It feels as though the illnesses have become part of the air itself, as though breathing is enough to invite them deeper. You try to remember what it felt like to be strong, to rise in the morning with energy, to walk the fields without stumbling. to carry wood without gasping. Those memories feel distant now, blurred like a dream that fades with waking. Your body is not your own. It belongs to the sickness, to the hunger that summoned it, to the weakness that follows. You look around the cottage and see the same truth in every face, every gesture, every cough and cry. The illnesses are not visitors. They are residents now, claiming space in your home, in your family, in your very flesh. You know death is not far behind. At first, one or two vanish. You notice the absence when a neighbour no longer steps into the fields, or when a familiar voice fails to join the low murmur of greetings in the morning. Doors remain shut, chimneys stay cold, paths grow untrodden. At first you tell yourself they are simply too weak to rise, that they will appear again when the sun grows stronger. But the truth becomes undeniable when the cart rattles past, carrying stiff bodies wrapped in rough cloth. You watch from your doorway as the horses strain against the weight, hooves striking against the frozen earth, and you feel a pressure settle into your chest. Death has always been a companion in the countryside, but not like this, not in numbers that grow with each day. Soon it is no longer one or two, but entire families disappearing. The village shrinks visibly, huts left empty, fields abandoned mid-furrow. Carts move more frequently now, drawn by men whose faces are gaunt, their eyes hollow, as they haul neighbours toward the burial pits. The carts creak under the weight of bodies, some stacked awkwardly, limbs stiff and protruding, heads lolling against one another. The smell follows them, a cloying sweetness that clings to the air, burrowing into your nostrils until it becomes impossible to separate from the smell of your own breath. Even after the carts pass, the odour lingers, settling over the village like a shroud. The dogs sense it too. They prowl along the edges of the lanes, their ribs showing, their eyes sharp. At first they bark and whine, as though confused by the sudden abundance of stillness. But soon they grow bolder. You see them tugging at rags left loose on the carts, gnawing at bones when the pits overflow. Their muzzles stain dark, their tails wag slowly, as though hunger has made them forget their loyalty. You chase them off when they come too near, shouting hoarsely, throwing stones, but they always return, drawn by the same smell that you cannot escape. Burial pits fill quickly. What once was a ritual of care, of prayers whispered and graves marked, becomes instead an act of necessity. Holes are dug wide and shallow, bodies laid in rows, covered hastily with soil. There is no time to build coffins, no wood to spare, no strength for ceremony. You stand at the edge of one pit, watching as neighbours lay their dead beside one another. Friends and strangers mingle together, the earth closing over them without distinction. The ground is hard, the shovels weak in trembling hands, and the pits never seem deep enough. You walk home with dirt clinging to your boots, the smell of decay following you like a second skin. Inside your cottage, the illness has already chosen its victim. Your daughter grows weaker than the others, the fever refusing to release its grip. Her small body lies curled on the straw, breath shallow, eyes half closed. You and your wife take turns tending her, wiping her forehead with damp cloths, whispering encouragement, urging her to sip water. The other children hover nearby, too frightened to approach, their faces pale, their hands clutching one another for comfort. You tell them their sister will recover, but even as you speak the words, you know they are lies. Her skin is too hot, her voice too faint, her body too light when you lift her. Hunger has hollowed her out, and sickness has done the rest. The end comes quietly, without warning. One night you wake to silence and know immediately what it means. You reach across the straw and place your hand against your daughter's chest, but no breath rises beneath your palm. Your wife begins to sob, muffling the sound in her hands so the other children will not wake. You sit motionless, staring into the darkness, feeling the weight of her stillness pressing against you. The room smells of sweat and smoke, the faint odour of illness clinging to every corner, and you realise this is the last time her body will fill the space. In the morning, you prepare the body with hands that tremble too much to be steady. You wrap her in cloth, tying knots that feel clumsy, pausing often to press your forehead against the small bundle. Your wife watches in silence, her eyes swollen, her lips bloodless. The surviving children cling to her skirts, their faces pressed into the fabric, unwilling to look. You carry your daughter outside, the air cold against your skin, the snow crunching beneath your boots. The cart waits at the end of the lane, already half filled with neighbours wrapped in their own cloths. The driver does not look at you as you lay her down among them. Her small frame shifts as the cart moves, settling against another until she disappears into the heap. You walk home with your arms empty, your chest hollow. The cottage feels smaller than ever, the silence unbearable. The surviving children watch you with wide eyes, their faces pale, their lips pressed tight. Your wife sits by the fire, staring into the flames without blinking. No one speaks. The absence is louder than words, louder than sobs, louder than anything. You feel the emptiness spreading through the cottage, filling every corner, pressing against every breath. The days that follow blur into one another, each marked by the passing of more carts, the digging of more pits, the silence of more cottages. You begin to count time not by the sun's rise or the turning of the seasons, but by the number of bodies that pass your door. Where once the fields rang with songs to keep time with the plough, now the air lies heavy and mute. No voices rise across the furrows. No laughter carries from cottages. No children shout to one another in play. Even the animals grow quiet, their bleats subdued, their barks rare. The village, once a place of sound woven through every day, begins to dissolve into stillness. After the carts have passed and the pits have swallowed their share, what remains is not only emptiness but silence, a silence that seeps into every wall, every lane, every breath. You feel it most in the mornings. There was a time when dawn brought the creak of doors opening, the rustle of footsteps, the crack of axes on wood. Now the sun rises to nothing but the faint hiss of wind against the shutters. When you step outside, snow crunching beneath your boots, the stillness presses against you like a weight. You scan the lanes, waiting for a neighbour to emerge, for smoke to curl steadily from a chimney, for some small proof that life continues. But doors stay closed, chimneys faint, and your own breath becomes the only sound you hear. It is not the absence of work alone that unsettles you. It is the absence of acknowledgement, the absence of others marking the same day. Inside your own cottage, the silence deepens. The surviving children no longer cry as often, their voices worn down to hoarse whispers. They sit quietly against the wall, too weak to quarrel, too drained to play. Their small bodies lean together, heads nodding, mouths half open in shallow sleep. Your wife moves about the room in near silence, her steps soft, her breath controlled, as though any noise would break something fragile in the air. She tends to the fire without speaking, stirs the pot without comment, her hands moving slowly. When you speak her name, she lifts her head, but does not answer immediately, as though the effort of forming words must first be weighed against their necessity. The cottage once held your daughter's laughter, thin but sharp, a sound that carried above the others. Now the gap she left behind hums in the quiet like a wound that cannot heal. You expect to hear her voice sometimes, to see her dart between her siblings, but only the silence replies. Your surviving children do not mention her, though you see their eyes turn toward the space where she used to lie, where her body once warmed the straw. They press themselves closer to your wife, seeking comfort she has little left to give, and the quiet around them deepens further. When you walk through the village, the stillness grows unbearable. Work has halted almost completely. Fields lie unattended, the furrows buried beneath snow, tools abandoned mid-task, the ringing of metal, the snapping of branches, the low drone of conversation, all gone. You pass cottages with shutters closed, doors barred, the interiors invisible. The silence outside suggests silence within, but you cannot tell whether it belongs to the living conserving their strength, or to the dead who no longer require it. Each hut you pass feels both inhabited and abandoned, and the uncertainty gnaws at you. Even those who do emerge move without sound. They step quickly, heads lowered, eyes averted, gestures sharp and economical. They do not greet you. Their lips part as if to speak, but no sound comes. You feel as though you're surrounded by ghosts still tethered to their tasks, shadows of the people they once were. A neighbour carries a bucket of water down the lane, her body hunched, her breath steaming, but she does not look up. Another drags a bundle of wood, his shoulders sagging, his feet dragging, but he does not pause when you pass. The silence between you is louder than speech, filled with everything you do not dare to say. At night, the quiet becomes suffocating. The fire burns low, crackling faintly, but beyond it, the cottage is filled with stillness. Your children shift occasionally, their small breaths shallow, their limbs twitching in uneasy sleep. Your wife lies beside them, her face turned toward the wall, her breathing even but faint. You listen to every sound, as though it is a message, the soft rustle of straw, the occasional moan, the dull scrape of wind against the shutters. When no sound comes at all, you find yourself straining, your own heartbeat thudding in your ears, louder than the world beyond. Sleep comes only in brief snatches, broken by the silence itself. The landscape mirrors the hush. Snow falls without sound, blanketing the fields, muting what little life remains. Trees stand skeletal, their branches bare and still. Birds are rare now, their calls absent, their wings invisible against the sky. Even the dogs, once noisy in their hunger, pad silently through the lanes, their movements stealthy, their growls low. When they do bark, the sound cracks the silence like a whip, startling you, reminding you how long it has been since you last heard such noise. The silence closes quickly afterward, heavier than before. Your body has grown used to the lack of sound, but your mind rebels against it. You long for the ordinary noises that once irritated you, the clamour of merchants in the market, the laughter of children chasing one another, the steady rhythm of a scythe cutting grass. Now you would give anything to hear them again, anything to break the stillness that suffocates you. You imagine them sometimes, phantom echoes in your head, but when you open your eyes, the silence greets you, patient and immovable. Even the act of speaking feels foreign now. You open your mouth to say something, anything, but the words catch in your throat. Your wife answers you rarely, her voice cracked, her tone subdued. The children mutter only when necessary, their words short and slurred. Conversation, once the thread that held families together through dark winters, has unravelled. You eat in silence, lie in silence, wake in silence. It feels as though the famine has not only taken food from your mouths, but also the words that once accompanied it. Eventually, whispers spread. Sound is rare now, and so every fragment of speech clings to the air with unnatural weight. People lower their voices to keep from being overheard, but in the silence of the village, even the faintest murmur seems to carry. You hear scraps of words drifting through thin walls, conversations clipped and nervous. They do not speak of work or harvests anymore. Those things are too far gone. What remains is rumour, stories too grim to be shared openly, but too urgent to be silenced. It begins with talk of people slipping away. A father leaves his cottage in the night and does not return. A mother says she's going to fetch water, and the bucket is later found abandoned by the well. Some say they went into the forest, seeking food hidden among roots or bark, desperate enough to risk the cold. Others insist they left because they could no longer watch their children waste away. You picture them walking into the trees, snow closing behind them, their footprints fading, their bodies never found. The image lingers in your mind, the forest becoming a mouth that swallows without returning. Then the whispers shift to children disappearing. At first, people say wolves have taken them, dragged them from the lanes under cover of darkness. But the snow shows no tracks, no sign of a struggle. You hear that a girl was sent to gather sticks and never came back, her family searching until they collapsed in exhaustion, finding nothing but silence. Another story tells of a boy last seen outside a cottage, his head turned toward the fields as if listening to a call, his body vanishing as quickly as a breath. Parents clutch their children tighter after hearing these stories, but hunger loosens every grip eventually. The children themselves grow too weak to resist, their small bodies easy to lift, their voices too faint to cry out. It is in this atmosphere that darker rumours take root. People lower their eyes when speaking of it, their voices catching in their throats. But the word spreads anyway. Cannibalism. At first you laugh bitterly, certain it is only a cruel invention meant to frighten. But the laughter dies quickly, even in your own mouth. The more you deny it, the more you notice how often the stories return, how persistent they are, how they multiply like weeds. Someone claims to have seen smoke rising from a hut where no food remains, the smell sharp and unfamiliar. Another says a mother buried her children, but not all of them. That one vanished from the pit. You do not know what to believe, but disbelief grows harder each day as hunger gnaws deeper. The silence of the village makes the rumours louder. Each creak of a door, each flicker of smoke from a chimney, each shadow passing behind a shutter seems to invite suspicion. You find yourself watching your neighbours differently, wondering what they are boiling in their pots, what they are hiding behind their walls. You notice the way they look back at you, eyes lingering too long, lips pressed tight, as though they are measuring you with the same suspicion. No one speaks of it openly, but every gaze feels heavy with unspoken questions. Your wife hears the rumours too. You see it in her face when she ladles the thin broth into bowls, the way her hands tremble as she sets them down. At night, she holds the children closer, pulling them against her side, her eyes darting toward the shuttered window, as though she expects someone to slip in. When you ask what she fears, she does not answer, only presses her lips together until they turn white. You understand anyway. The hunger has blurred the line between what people will not do and what they must. One evening, you hear muffled sobbing from the hut next to yours. At dawn, the sobbing is gone, and no smoke rises from their chimney. Days later, the cart carries the family away, their bodies wrapped together. Yet the rumour grows that not all of them were found, that one was missing. The story repeats in hushed voices, growing more grotesque each time it is told. You cover your ears, but the words slip through, and you cannot stop imagining what might have happened inside those walls. Fear grows alongside hunger. You no longer trust the quiet that hangs over the village. When a neighbour greets you, their voice subdued, you wonder what they whisper at home when the door is barred. When a family disappears, you wonder if they slipped into the forest or if something darker happened. The children sense it too. They huddle against your wife, their eyes darting nervously when a neighbour knocks, their hands clinging tightly to her dress. Even their silence seems laced with suspicion, as though they understand more than they can speak. The rumours sink into your own thoughts, no matter how much you resist them. Lying awake at night, you imagine the possibilities you swore you never would. You picture flesh boiling in a pot, the smell disguised by smoke and herbs. You picture teeth tearing at meat, swallowing greedily, feeling the stomach ease for the first time in weeks. You recoil from the image, sickened, ashamed, but the hunger presses it back into your mind again. You wonder if the stories are truly whispers of deeds already done, or if they are warnings of what you yourself might one day be capable of. Not all the rumours are so dark. You hear rumours of wagons loaded with flour, of trains carrying grain, of officials preparing aid. The stories drift into the village like smoke, clung to desperately for a day or two, then fading when no wagons appear, when no sacks are delivered. Each promise feels like a cruel echo of the last, words spoken to keep you waiting, to keep you still, to keep you hoping against what you already know. Hunger is quicker than bureaucracy, and by the time relief is said to be on its way, another family has already vanished. Another pit has been filled. What does arrive are not wagons with food, but officials with ledgers. They appear suddenly, sometimes in groups of 2 or 3, sometimes in larger numbers, their coats thick and warm, their boots polished. They step into the village as though it were any other season, their voices brisk, their hands clutching clipboards and pens. They do not linger on the silence, on the smell of rot, on the children slumped against walls. Their eyes slide over the bodies, their noses wrinkle faintly, but recover quickly. They do not come to acknowledge suffering. They come to count. You stand beside your neighbours as the inspections take place. The sound of pens scratching across paper, louder than the moans from the cottages. The officials ask about quotas, about last year's harvest, about numbers you no longer have the energy to provide. They nod as though satisfied when the columns are filled, ignoring the fact that barns are empty and cupboards bare. When a body lies in the lane, stiff and contorted, they step around it without comment, their words continuing without pause. For them, the only truth is the ink drying on the page, the neatness of figures, the illusion that order remains. The sight of them ignites a bitter fury inside you, though you do not dare to show it. You watch them mark figures that deny reality, their pens moving while the stench of death surrounds them. You want to shout, to demand that they look, that they write down what they see instead of what they're told to see. But you know what happens to those who speak too loudly, to those who contradict the reports. Whispers carry as easily as sickness, and denunciation can arrive from anywhere, from anyone. So you swallow your anger, keeping your hands clasped tightly to keep them from shaking, your eyes lowered so they will not betray you. Propaganda follows them like a shadow. Posters arrive in the villages, declaring the land fertile, the harvests plentiful, the people thriving. Bright colours depict golden fields, smiling workers, overflowing barns. The images look obscene against the backdrop of your village, where the only fields are barren and the only smiles are forced through hunger. Yet the posters multiply, plastered against walls, nailed to doors, fluttering in the wind like cruel jokes. Officials speak of prosperity, of progress, of a future that belongs to those who endure. They do not mention the pits, the carts, the silence that grows heavier each day. You hear stories of meetings in nearby towns where officials stand before crowds and insist that reports of famine are lies, exaggerations spread by troublemakers. They speak of enemies undermining the state, of foreign agitators inventing misery to weaken the people's resolve. You sit in your cottage and wonder if you're one of those lies, if your children's hollow faces, your wife's trembling hands, your daughter's grave are all inventions. The absurdity cuts deeper than hunger. To be erased while still breathing is a cruelty beyond starvation. Neighbours argue quietly about whether aid is being withheld or whether it never existed at all. Some cling to the belief that wagons are on their way, that the state cannot ignore suffering forever. Others shake their heads, their eyes glazed, convinced that no help will come, that the officials' words are meant only to distract until nothing remains. The arguments do not last long. No one has the strength to maintain them. Voices fade quickly. swallowed by silence, leaving only the faint rustle of wind against the walls. You watch your wife shrink beneath the weight of the official's presence. When they enter the cottage to inspect, she stands stiffly, her hands clasped, her eyes lowered. They glance at the children slumped on the straw, at the pot simmering with nothing more than weeds, and then they look away. Their pens scratch anyway, recording what must be recorded, ignoring what cannot be denied. After they leave, your wife sags against the wall, her breath shallow, her face pale. She does not speak for hours afterward, as though their presence has drained the last reserves of strength from her. The surviving children sense the charade as well. When they see the officials, their faces twist with something too old for their years, a mixture of fear and contempt. They cling to your wife's skirts, hiding their faces when the men enter, refusing to look at the polished boots that step across the floor where their sister once lay. Later, they whisper to you, asking why the officials did not bring food, why they only wrote in their books. You have no answer. You tell them to sleep, to rest, to wait. Though you know sleep brings no nourishment, and waiting brings nothing but more waiting. Each inspection feels like a performance, a cruel play in which you're forced to participate. The officials nod gravely, their pens scratching, their boots clattering against the floorboards, their coats buttoned tight against the cold. You and your neighbours stand beside them, hollow and weak, playing the role of compliant subjects. The stage is set, the lines rehearsed, the conclusion predetermined. When they leave, the silence that follows is heavier than before, filled with the knowledge that nothing will change. You realise at last that survival will not come from above. The state does not see you, except as numbers to be recorded, quotas to be met, lies to be maintained. The posters may declare abundance, the speeches may promise relief, the officials may scratch endlessly at their papers, but none of it fills your stomach. None of it revives your daughter, or your neighbours, or the voices that have already gone silent. You understand that you are alone, that your family is alone, that the village is alone. If survival comes at all, it will not be because of wagons or promises or reports. It will come despite them. Families begin to fracture under pressure. Hunger presses into every corner of life, and where once people clung to one another for strength, now they pull apart, frayed by the weight of absence. Quarrels erupt over scraps of bread, over handfuls of grain, over who will eat first and who will go without. Husbands snap at wives, wives scold children. Children cry until their voices crack. Yet the arguments never last long. Words fade quickly when there is no strength to carry them, dissolving into silence that is heavier than the quarrels themselves. The fractures remain long after the voices fall quiet, widening in the stillness, carving gulfs where love once lived. Some decide they cannot stay. Word spreads of families slipping away in the night, abandoning their cottages to seek relief in the cities or in the forests. They gather what little they can carry, rags for clothing, a crust or two saved in secret, and set off without farewells. Neighbours wake to find doors hanging open, footprints leading out into the snow, cottages echoing with emptiness. For a time, hope clings to the idea that they might find survival elsewhere, that somewhere beyond the horizon, food still exists. But the rumours return quickly. A family scene collapsed on the road, frozen in place, their bundles scattered. Another turned away at the edge of a town, guards barring the gates, forcing them back into the wilderness. The footprints vanish, swallowed by drifts of snow, and the absence of those who left grows as permanent as the pits. Most do not attempt to escape at all. They are too weak to walk more than a few steps, too faint to carry themselves beyond the lane. They lie in their huts, conserving what little strength they have left, and the silence in the village deepens as fewer venture outside. Entire families sink into their straw beds, eyes vacant, limbs motionless, their bodies indistinguishable from the stillness around them. A neighbour you once greeted every morning now lies curled against the wall, his breath shallow, his children pressed tightly against him, their bodies shivering together until even the shivering stops. You pass their hut and hear nothing, not even the faintest moan. You do not knock. You know what silence means now. Inside your own cottage, the strain breaks what little remained of normal life. The surviving children cling to your wife, their faces pale, their lips cracked. They no longer ask for food, as though the effort of speaking is too costly, or as though they have learned that the request itself carries only disappointment. Your wife tends them with a mechanical tenderness, moving through the motions of care with hands that tremble, not just from hunger, but from the slow erosion of hope. She holds them, hums the old lullabies in tones so low you can barely hear them, presses damp cloths to fevered brows while her own fingers go numb. You try to speak to her, to tell her you will endure, that the officials will relent, that spring will return with mercy, but the words fall flat in your mouth, hollow as the cupboards. The breakdown does not stop at anger and leaving. It reaches into loss. One morning, a few weeks after your daughter, another small body grows cold in the corner of your hut. Your youngest son, who used to trail behind the others, who caught scuffed knees and laughed through choky breaths, lies very still, the shallow rise and fall of breath slowed until it ceases. You and your wife wake to his small face gone hard, the eyes open and empty. Your wife breaks then, a sound between a sob and a wail that you have never heard from her before. You wrap the child clumsily in cloth while the others watch. Their faces expressionless, as though they have been kept from shock so often the next one feels like habit. The cart takes him with the others, and you carry your arms away empty again, feeling the same, hollow, amplified. A few days later, when the fever that has hounded your wife deepens into something that will not be pushed back by blankets and damp rags, she is gone as well. Her breaths grow thin and irregular, each one a single painful event. You sit beside her while the light fades from her face, holding her hand and feeling the bones beneath the skin, as if they are all that remains. She presses your fingers once, barely, then loosens her grip. You speak to her even though she does not answer, telling her not to leave, promising somehow that you will find a way. The promise feels obscene in your own mouth. When she finally slips away, it is quiet and small, without drama, as if the body had simply run out of reasons to continue. You wrap her with trembling hands and place her beside the other bundles on the cart. The driver nods without looking at you. The cart moves off, and the lane feels emptier than you thought possible. The household that once counted on 2 parents now contains only the surviving children, and you, a smaller constellation orbiting a larger absence. Neighbours, many of whom have already lost spouses or children, offer what condolences they can, their hands on your shoulder, their eyes blank with their own grief. There is no ceremony, no ritual beyond the hurried bundling and the cold mound of earth. Grief is practical here, performed between tasks, swallowed quickly so the living can continue to perform the smallest necessary functions. You find that the language for sorrow has worn thin. There are no metaphors left that fit this scale of loss. Trust within the community frays further. Where people once exchanged scraps, now they hide what they possess out of fear. Fear of theft, of robbery, or of having their stores taken by officials. The old mutual aid that kept winters bearable dissolves into self-preservation. You learn that some neighbours stole from the dead, rifling through bundles at night, taking anything edible or useful before shovels closed over shallow graves. The knowledge settles in your gut like a stone. You measure the line between survival and savagery and find it alarmingly thin. The surviving children change before your eyes. Their faces droop into something foreign, Their small complaints vanish, replaced by a hollow quiet. They sit more often than they run, their hands folded in their laps. Their eyes, once bright with minor mischief, stare past you into some private space where the dead still laugh and play. Sometimes they whisper the name of their sister or their mother, and then go very still, as if speaking aloud has exhausted another reserve of energy. You try to teach them small tasks to occupy hands, mending a tear, tying a bundle, but their fingers are clumsy, their attention drifting back to the empty corner where play once happened. Outside, the village has become a collection of husks. You walk the lanes and see faces you once knew, now gaunt and expressionless. People pass you without recognition, eyes blank, movements sluggish. They no longer wave, no longer call your name. The community that once bound you together has dissolved, replaced by solitary endurance, each family, an island, adrift in a sea of hunger. You realise you must look the same to them. Body hollowed, gaze vacant, presence ghost-like. The living are spectres of themselves, each one a husk wandering among the ruins of daily life. Hunger no longer feels sharp, but hollow. The pangs that once clenched your stomach, the stabbing aches that kept you awake at night, have dulled into something quieter and stranger. It feels as though your body has given up trying to remind you of what it needs. The emptiness has become so constant that it no longer screams. It simply lingers, a low hum beneath every movement. You cannot tell if this is mercy or another cruelty, because what replaces the pain is not relief, but a kind of void. It spreads through you, flattening sensations, dulling thoughts, making the hours blur into one another without weight. You stop caring about neighbours. Once you listened for their footsteps, watched for their smoke, wondered if they still survived. Now their absence no longer stirs you. You hear no voices from nearby huts, see no faces in the lanes, and feel nothing. The village might have emptied itself entirely, and you would not know until a cart rattled by with its load. Even then, you suspect you would only watch without comment, the sight registering in your eyes but not in your heart. You no longer flinch at death because you no longer expect anything else. Even your family begins to fade into the same blur. You move among your remaining children as though through mist. Their faces, hollowed and pale, no longer strike you with shock. Words fade from your mouth. You answer rarely when spoken to, your replies short and flat. Conversation requires effort you no longer possess. Silence settles into your chest, pressing outward until it seems to fill the room itself. The children no longer ask you questions. Your wife no longer tries to draw words from you. They have accepted your withdrawal as they accepted hunger, as they accepted death. Something inevitable, something not to be fought. The air feels heavy with what is unsaid, but even that weight no longer moves you to speak. Your thoughts narrow to weeds, bark, scraps. Food has become the only shape your mind can take, yet even the thought of it is dull. You imagine bark softening in water, nettles collapsing into sludge, a strip of leather boiled until it tears between your teeth. The images cycle endlessly, like a wheel turning without direction. You do not think of spring, or of the fields, or of a future beyond this day. You do not think of your wife's face or the children who are left. All of them exist in the periphery, while the centre of your mind is occupied only by the idea of swallowing something, anything, to keep the void from spreading further. You sit against the wall of the cottage, staring at its rough surface, your eyes tracing the cracks in the wood, the stains from smoke, the places where the damp has darkened the grain. You have stared so long that the patterns seem to shift, to blur, to take on shapes that are not really there. But you do not move, do not blink more than you must. The wall holds your attention because it asks nothing of you. It does not require you to speak or to hope or to feel. It is easier to watch the wall than to face the emptiness within yourself. You realise you're no longer living in any true sense of the word. A final thinning comes, and most will not see spring. The village, already hollowed by silence and death, grows emptier still as the cold weeks drag on. Winter presses hard against the walls of every cottage, sealing people in with their hunger, their sickness, their despair. The faintest cough now sounds like a death sentence. The absence of smoke from a chimney, once a cause for curiosity, is now an almost certain announcement that another household has succumbed. The pits at the edge of the fields grow larger, their soil turned and frozen again and again, until the ground itself seems weary of swallowing so many. Each day you wake unsure of who will remain by nightfall. Some stumble upon hidden stores, the careful savings of desperate hands. A sack of rye overlooked in a loft, a jar of pickled cabbage buried beneath floorboards, a crust wrapped in cloth and forgotten at the back of a cupboard. These treasures keep their families alive for a few more days, sometimes a week. You hear whispers of such finds, envy gnawing at you as fiercely as hunger. Others receive scraps from neighbours, thin soups or fragments of bread passed across thresholds in acts of mercy so rare they feel miraculous. But more often you see the other side, bodies collapsing before any help can reach them, eyes glazing over as their last breath fogs in the freezing air. The difference between life and death seems almost random now, a lottery drawn by invisible hands. A neighbour who looked strong yesterday lies in the cart today, while another, weaker in body, continues to cling to life. You begin to realise that survival is not a matter of strength, or will, or virtue. It is chance, nothing more. To live is an accident. To die is inevitable for most. And the line between the two is so thin, you sometimes feel it pass over you in the night, as if the air itself were deciding whether to let you rise again in the morning. Your own family bears this truth in its bones. The daughter who once filled the cottage with laughter is gone. Your youngest son followed her soon after. Your wife, who tried so hard to shield the children, to stir pots of weeds and bark with hands that trembled, wasted away before your eyes until even her breath deserted her. You remember carrying their bodies to the cart, one after the other, your arms emptying in sequence, your chest hollowing out each time. The spaces they once filled in the cottage are still there, gaps that no silence can cover, absences that echo louder than words. Yet some of your children remain. They're thin, their faces drawn, their bodies fragile, but they breathe. Their eyes, though sunken, still turn toward you in the half-light. Waiting for some gesture, some reassurance, you sit beside them sharing whatever scraps you find, chewing slowly so that they may eat more, hiding your portion to pass to them later. They huddle against you at night, their small forms bony but warm, and you hold them even as your arms feel too weak to carry the weight. They do not speak often anymore, but sometimes they whisper, their voices faint as wind, asking when spring will come. You tell them soon, because to say anything else would be cruelty. The days drag on in this suspended state, where life and death brush against one another so often that you no longer try to keep them separate. You watch the carts pass less frequently now, not because death has slowed, but because so few remain to be carried. The lanes are nearly empty, the market long abandoned, the well-visited only rarely. You step outside and feel as though the village itself has died, its bones left standing while its heart has been consumed. Snow lies thick and undisturbed on the paths, broken only by your footprints, a reminder of how few walk here anymore. When help finally comes, it arrives too late for most. A wagon appears one morning, its wheels creaking, carrying sacks of flour. Men step down, their coats warm, their faces ruddy, and they unload the food into a building set aside for distribution. The news spreads slowly, almost unbelievably, and the surviving villagers crawl from their cottages to stand in line. The smell of flour, raw and sharp, fills the air, and people weep at the sight of it. But for many the gift is useless. They are too weak to eat, their stomachs shrunken, their bodies past the point of revival. Bread placed in their hands crumbles as they fall beside it, unable to chew, unable to swallow. Others manage only a few bites before their bodies reject it, racked with cramps that end in silence. You stand in line with your children, your legs trembling, your arms weak. When the flour is placed into your hands, it feels impossibly heavy, as though survival itself has been handed to you in a sack. You clutch it tightly, afraid it might vanish, and stagger back to your cottage. Inside, you mix it with water, shaping something that barely resembles bread, baking it in the embers until the crust hardens. You break it carefully, dividing it among your children, watching them chew slowly, tears in their eyes. You take your portion last, swallowing with difficulty, the taste almost alien after so long. It does not fill you, not really, but it stirs something you thought lost, the faint recognition of what food once meant. Even with this relief, the cost is written everywhere around you. Your wife's absence is a constant shadow in the cottage, her voice and her hands gone from the rhythms of survival. Your daughter's laughter will never return, her corner of the straw forever empty. Your son's small form will not stir again, no matter how tightly you shut your eyes and will it. Outside, neighbours who once greeted you are gone, their huts silent, their chimneys cold. The village is not merely thinner, it has been gutted, its life stripped away until only fragments remain. You live, but survival feels hollow. It is not triumph but accident, not achievement but endurance. You and the children who remain eat enough to keep standing, but you know you're surrounded by ghosts, of family, of friends, of neighbours. Each meal reminds you of who is missing, of whose share you now consume. Seasons shift and the earth behaves as though nothing has happened. The snows melt into dark rivers that feed the soil, and green shoots push upward again. Fields bloom, and the same black earth that starved you erupts in colour and life. Grain rises tall, swaying in the wind, thick and abundant, as if it had not withheld itself. Only months before, the sight of it should bring relief, but instead it fills you with disbelief, even anger. The land does not mourn, does not remember, does not hesitate. It offers itself freely now, when so many who once worked it are gone. Life resumes as though the famine had been a dream. People emerge from their huts and move into the fields, though fewer voices rise to meet the work. Tools creak again. Animals grunt against their harnesses. Sweat drips into the earth. But where once the lanes were filled with neighbours, now there are gaps, spaces that cannot be closed. Families who vanished into the pits, leave only empty cottages, their doors sagging, their roofs caving in. Where children once ran, only silence stretches. And yet, those who survive return to their tasks. For what else can be done? The earth demands labour, and those left alive obey, because to resist would be to starve again. Officials move on. They arrive for inspections once more, their clipboards in hand, their pens scratching as though the famine were a matter of arithmetic. They ask how many hectares are planted, how many sacks are stored, how many quotas will be filled. They do not ask how many neighbours you buried, how many children you carried to the cart, how many wives are missing from doorways. They tally numbers, not names. Their reports speak of shortages and recoveries, of challenges overcome, of resilience displayed by the people. The words are clean, the lines straight, the ink dark and orderly. None of it resembles the pits, the silence, the smell of rot that once saturated the village. Graves remain shallow and unmarked. When you walk beyond the fields, you find the places where the soil was disturbed again and again, where mounds of earth rise unevenly. Rain has washed some of them flat. Animals have torn through others, leaving bones exposed. Grass grows over the pits, covering them quickly, erasing the signs of what lies beneath. Children too young to remember run past them without pause. their laughter sharp against the quiet. You stand at the edges of those places and feel the weight of them pressing against your chest, but no marker exists to testify to what happened here. Only memory, and memory is fragile. The cottages tell their own story, though even that fades. Many remain half empty, their shutters closed, their hearths cold. Roofs sag under the weight of neglect. Walls lean against the wind. Inside, the straw mats lie abandoned, dust gathering where once bodies huddled together for warmth. Some cottages are pulled apart for wood, the beams carried to fuel stoves, the planks used to patch the homes of the living. Each dismantled wall erases another fragment of what once was. The village itself becomes thinner, dissolving piece by piece until it looks like a place that was never full, never loud, never alive. Neighbours rarely speak of those who are gone. Their names fade from conversation, replaced by vague gestures and silences. To say them aloud would invite pain, would stretch a wound that must remain closed if survival is to continue. You find yourself following the same path. You think of your daughter, your son, your wife, but you do not speak their names. You let them vanish into silence, as if by doing so you can endure the weight of their absence. Their faces blur in your memory, their voices grow fainter until you're unsure if you recall them clearly or if you're inventing them anew each time you try. The famine consumes memory as surely as it consumed flesh. The state does not permit mourning. Instead, it provides slogans. Relief has arrived, the worst is over, the future is bright. Pamphlets and speeches declare that resilience has triumphed, that the strength of the people has carried them through adversity. You listen and feel your hands clench, but you say nothing. To question the words would be dangerous. To challenge the narrative would place you at risk. And so you nod, as your neighbours nod, as the village nods, all of you complicit in the rewriting of what you lived. The famine is no longer a tragedy. It is a victory of endurance. You sit silently as your reality is erased in front of you. The years move on, and the famine becomes harder to hold on to. The children who survived grow older, their faces filling out again, their eyes losing the hollow look. They do not speak of what they endured, or if they do, their words are fleeting, quickly set aside. They prefer to speak of harvests, of work, of the present. You do not press them, though inside you fear what it means. If they forget, then what happened will vanish entirely. And yet, you understand their desire. Who would choose to carry these memories forward when forgetting promises a lighter burden? You try to remember for them. You sit in the fields and close your eyes, recalling the silence, the smell, the taste of substitutes. You see your wife's hands trembling as she stirred the pot, your daughter's laughter fading into coughs, your son's body curled small against the straw. You feel the cart pulling away again, leaving you with nothing but emptiness. The memories burn inside you, but when you open your mouth to share them, the words collapse before they reach your tongue. The silence has become too heavy, pressing against you until even memory feels like a burden. You walk through fertile fields, the soil black and rich, the grain tall and abundant. The wind ripples through the stalks, carrying the sound of life. And for a moment you almost believe nothing happened here. But you know better. You feel the absence at your side, the weight of those who will never walk beside you again. You press your hand to the earth and find it warm, fertile, alive, indifferent. The land has forgotten, and soon so will history. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story, where a family tried to survive in one of the most fertile regions on Earth, only to be undone by hunger, indifference, and silence. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S. and Rich Davis. Sleep well.